Welcome back. I had this entire crate, hopefully you guys can see it, it's kind of big to fit into the camera, full of pickling cucumbers. So I want to share with you guys how I made a year's worth of pickles for our family with this crate. So let's get into it. I sorted through all of the pickling cucumbers that were in that case, and let me tell you, there were quite a few cucumbers, and it was really amazing how many were in there. Unfortunately, there were numerous ones that had already turned yellow, and I was not about to use those in making my pickles, so I had to toss them. I mean, they weren't just a little light yellow, they were really yellow. Either they were put in the case like that, or they had turned and they had that case for a while. I'm not really sure. So thankfully I was able to get a credit from the farmer's market for the fact that the pickling cucumbers weren't of best quality. But anywho, so now we're going to go ahead and get all the spheres cut. The cucumbers have already been washed. I took time to do that off camera so you guys don't have to watch that. And I'm just going to get these set and ready so I can get them into the jars. And now you can see I'm just going ahead and I'm going to pack all of my quart-sized jars with as many cucumbers as I can get, but I also don't want to overpack them. So I'm going to go ahead and get as many jars filled as I can with all the pickle spears, because as you'll see, I'm also doing another style of pickles as well, and you'll see that just a little bit in the video. That I've got all of my jars filled, I want to make sure that I had left space for the brining liquid to fill the jars. Some of the cucumbers that were a little bit shorter wound up, I just put them on top of the jars, as you can kind of see in the video. But now you have to add in the pickling crisp. This allows the pickles to stay crispy once they're in the brine. Now, I will say that I have used regular pickles in the past when I ran out of pickling cucumbers, and you definitely don't want to do that. And yes, you can make a pickle out of it, but they will not be crunchy no matter what you add to them or what you do to them. They're way too soft. So if you want that crisp, make sure you use pickling cucumbers and you use this little ball crisp. Now I'm going to be moving on to making, I guess you would call them hamburger dills or hamburger slices. It really just depends. Everybody's kind of got a little bit different name. I just decided to slice some of the pickling cucumbers to change it up so we could have some that would fit better on sandwiches, on cucumbers. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. On like sandwiches and hamburgers. Oh my goodness, it is early in the morning while I'm editing this, so I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of this prepped and ready so I have it so I can fill my jars. I have now sliced up all of the pickling cucumbers for what I'm going to need to make two different types of pickles. And before I put some in a jar, what I'm removing is enough of these sliced pickles to make bread and butter pickles. Now, the bread and butter pickles are typically the ones that I always keep in the refrigerator. This is my favorite recipe for bread and butter pickles. Quite honestly, if I try some at the store, I do not like bread and butter pickles. This is the only recipe. I will make sure I link it down below. It is phenomenal. I had given this recipe to a friend of mine who was a caterer for my sister-in-law's wedding, and ever since then, this is the only pickle that I like that would be a bread and butter pickle. So you'll see that just a little bit later in the video. Right now, I'm going to be getting all of my jars ready to make my hamburger dill slices. Now, these jars are clean, just to be clear. They are already clean and sterilized. I just had them off to the side. I don't feel it's necessary to film those kinds of things for you to see, but just so you know, they are clean and sterile. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the spears. I'm going to get all the slices in there, and I'm going to get the jars packed, but I'm not going to overstuff them. I do want to make sure that enough of the brine gets into the jars to really pickle the cucumbers. Now, if you have never made pickles before, this is actually a really easy one to do. It's a fun one to do. I've done several canning videos. I will make sure to link some of those below. You can check out my channel to see some of the other things I've canned. Pineapple was one of my absolute favorite things to can. It was so much fun. I don't know why it was so much fun, but it really was. I really enjoyed it. And thankfully I have enough so I don't have to can anymore this summer. But if I happen to come across a really good deal on pineapples, I will snag them up and I will can some more just to have it because it was so much fun. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these filled so that way we can move on to making the brine. As with the pickle spears, you're going to repeat the same process with these. You're going to be adding in your pickle crisp. Now with this one, I added in 1/8 of a teaspoon. Again, as I noted before, make sure to follow the ball directions according to the size jar that you're using, because it's obviously not going to be the same. You won't need as much in these half pint jars as you would into the quart jar. So once we get this done, we're going to be moving on to making the brine. Now this is what I like to use, the Mrs. Wag's dill pickle, for making my shelf stable pickles. If I am making refrigerator pickles, not including the bread and butter, but just regular dill pickles for the refrigerator, I will use fresh dill and fresh seasonings. But when I am doing shelf stable, that is what I like to use. You are free to follow another recipe as you so choose. I know for some, they may be like, oh, that's not real canning. Well, actually, yes, it is. And so this is what works for my family. We really enjoy them. Again, our friends really enjoy them because I tend to make enough to give to friends and family. I don't give away my entire stash, but I do give away some to share with everybody. So I'm just following the directions on the package. I don't remember the exact measurement, so I'm not going to be able to tell you. Just, you can find these packages at Walmart. They're fairly inexpensive. You just follow the directions. It's really just their seasoning, water, and vinegar according to their measurements, and that's what you do. I did have a couple of packages, and I did have enough just to make all of the jars of pickles that I have on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set up. We are going to be heating this thoroughly, and as you can see, I've got my canning pot in the background as that water is starting to warm up so I can start to water bath can my pickles. Now, water bath canning is one of my favorite because it's still work, but it's easier and less time consuming than pressure canning. But we will get into that when I do a video on pressure canning. So as you can see, I've got my brine getting ready to warm up. My water is heating up as we move into starting to fill the jars now that my brine is ready. So I'm going to go ahead and get these topped off with all of the brining liquid, and then we will move on to the next step. One thing you want to make sure that you do once you fill all your jars with liquid is you want to take I just took a thin wooden spoon and just kind of tried to move the pickles around a little bit to release any air that may be trapped in the jar, because you don't want to can them with any air bubbles that are in the jar. This just, if you kind of move them around just a little bit, will help with that. Now I'm just getting some of the liquid cleared off, because you're going to want to make sure that you clean the lids, the rim of the jar really well, because if not, once you put the lid on and you go to water bath can it, it's very possible that the seal will not take if there's any kind of residual anything on the edge of the glass. So just make sure. I usually will take a paper towel and I will take a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of like soapy water on it, making sure it's not soaked so it drips into the jar, just enough to wipe the edge on the rim. And then that way that helps ensure that that seal can be made when you water bath can it. Now, the directions for this is follow what Ball recommends. I want to say it's 15 minutes in the water, and then it's once the 15 minutes is up, you're going to turn off the heat. You're going to remove the lid, and you're going to let it sit for 5 minutes and then pull them out. But just follow the directions, and that's how you're going to get it done. And while those are water bath canning, I'm moving on to the dill pickle rounds. And you're just going to do the same thing. You're going to fill them with your brining liquid. You're going to make sure you remove any air bubbles. You're going to wipe your rims, and then you're going to put your lids on, securing them not super tight. You want to just do it enough to tighten the jar where it kind of turns on its own, just to make a good seal. If you seal too tightly with the band, you could cause the jar to crack. So I'm going to get these filled, and then we're going to water bath can these as well. It is now time to move on to the dill rounds, and I'm just getting my jars in here. You want to make sure that you don't overpack, and because you want to be able to make sure that the water gets around. And as you can see, I was like, oh, nope, never mind. Let me spread them out a little bit more, because you want to make sure that the entire jar gets heated through, so that way you're canning it safely and properly, so you don't have to worry about the pickles while they're being stored on the shelf. Now, that little tool, you can buy it as it comes in a package. You can get all of this stuff at Walmart. Actually, I find that they have the best price, because Amazon, I don't know what's wrong with them, but they are charging an arm and a leg for this canning set. It's crazy. So it does help. You do want that to help get the jars out, because they are incredibly hot, as you would expect coming out of boiling water. But I just want to say, make sure to have that tool if you possibly can. It's not very expensive. Now you can see those are some of the spheres that I did, not all of them. Those are the rounds. And then this is what they're going to look like when they come out. And so just setting them aside, I always put them on a cooling rack. I do not put them directly on any surface. So now we're moving on to the bread and butter pickles. I will make sure to link the recipe below so you guys can see the exact measurements for everything. Now, I am doubling this recipe. I always do, just because we love them. And to be clear, I'm also making this batch keto friendly. My husband's on keto, and by using a sugar substitute, he can enjoy these pickles. And so they, honestly, I will say, I tried them. They taste like they normally do, using the substitute, so which is great. But this allows me to have something for him to put with like a little charcuterie lunch with meats and cheeses, kind of give a little bit of different texture to his plate, so he's not, he can eat the dill, but this just gives him another choice, if you will. Now, what you have to do in this first step is you are going to cover it with salt. Again, I will link the recipe below so you guys can see the exact measurements. And what you're doing by that is you're starting to pull out some of the water in the cucumbers. You will put the kosher salt on top. I'm actually using sea salt, but it works the same. And then you are going to let them sit for an hour in the refrigerator, and then we will move on to the next step. So again, don't worry, recipe will be linked down below. Once the salt is added, you want to give them a good stir just to make sure that all of the cucumbers get coated in salt. Again, this is going to help to pull out some of that moisture, and it's actually going to help the pickles stay crispy in the fridge. Now, it has been an hour. You can see the liquid at the bottom of that bowl that was there. That is the moisture you've pulled out. Now, you will at this point rinse the cucumbers off, because you don't want that extra salt when you make the pickles. That was just to pull out the moisture to help keep them crisp for the refrigerator. So I'm just going to take a moment to rinse them off, get all the salt off, and then we're going to move on to the next step on creating these bread and butter pickles. Now that the salt has been rinsed off the cucumbers, I'm going to go ahead and put them into this bowl. And to this bowl, I'm going to be adding in some thinly sliced onion according to the directions. And then I'm just going to kind of stir this around and get this mixed together, so that way the onion will kind of break up, and then we'll be able to put that into the jars when we get to that point. So I'm just going to stir, and then I'm going to go ahead and set this aside as we begin to work on the brine. All right, now that everything's mixed together, we're going to go ahead and put together the brine. And as you can see, I'm using monk fruit, and then I'm also going to be using the Swerve, their version of brown sugar. Now keep in mind, the measurements are exactly the same for regular sugars as it would be for the sugar substitutes. And I'm doing this because it makes the pickles keto friendly. Typically, I don't do them keto friendly. I will just make them regular, but again, I'm trying to make sure that I have some variety for my husband in the house, and because these are refrigerator pickles, it worked just fine. Now, I would never do this for a shelf-stable pickle. I would always follow the exact recipe for that, but for refrigerator, it's perfectly fine. These will last in the refrigerator for months. I find that they last longer than what the recipe actually says, but you use your judgment on what you want to make. And so they also call for apple cider vinegar, regular vinegar, and you'll see the rest of the ingredients as we move on. But again, super simple. Most of the ingredients that are in this recipe you should have in your kitchen. The only one that might be a little different is maybe the turmeric. I know not everybody might have turmeric in the house. I honestly only have it just for this recipe. I don't use it in anything else, but that's just a preference. Now, it will call for mustard seed. I'm going to go ahead and get there. And remember, I'm not going to give the measurements as I'm voicing over. I will link the recipe, and then you guys can see what the measurements are from there. But I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of the ingredients in, and then we're going to go ahead and start to heat this up on the stove. Now that the mustard seed is added, I'm going to be adding in celery seed, and then I'll be following that with turmeric. Again, I feel like most people would have these in their house, but maybe not. So you can always just buy a small amount of the ingredients needed, and these last for a long time in your cabinet, so it wouldn't be a big deal to have them only for this recipe, because really that's all that I ever use them for, is for this recipe. So I don't have to worry too much. It'll last me a couple years of having it. Now I'm just going to be moving the pot over to the stove. We're going to heat this through, following the directions, until the sugar is dissolved and it's hot. Again, it will take only a matter of maybe 5 minutes to bring this to where it needs to be. And then once the brine is hot and the sugar is melted, then you're going to go ahead and pour it over your cucumbers. Now, again, keep in mind, this version is good for keto. It's also good for people who are avoiding sugars. I can't recommend any other types of substitutes, like say if somebody wanted to do honey or maple syrup or something like that, because I've never tested that out. This was actually a test to make them keto when I was doing this instead of making them regular, and they turned out for that. So that's the only thing I can advise on, regular and keto. But then I just poured over the liquid, and then I'm just going to kind of press down the cucumbers and onions just to try to get it submerged into the brining liquid. And then they're going to have a cover put on and then go in their fridge for 24 hours, and then they're ready to eat and enjoy. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video on how I prepped a year's worth of pickles for my family. And I really appreciate all the support, all the comments and the likes. And then I will see you guys in the next video. But until then, have an absolutely wonderful week.